let's be honest, no matter which way you slice or dice it, Port Adelaide failed to prepare mentally for this performance and put in a horror show.
Yeah, they did. I think context is important in terms of how good an opportunity this was for Port Adelaide. And we spoke about it in the build-up, didn't we? How good it looked. They've been in their own beds when other teams have been travelling. I mean, as far as prelims goes, this was the path of least resistance. When you look at all the challenges that the Bulldogs were faced with and all of the things that lined up perfectly for Port Adelaide, and that's why Ken Hinkley mentioned the devastation in the fallout. So, but I mean, before we fire our bullets, I think it's important to just have a look at what it looked like for Port Adelaide, particularly early in the contest, with respects to their effort.
Well, we saw the numbers from the first quarter, and this is why the numbers were so inept.
Have a look at this. So this is a prelim. You're taking your eyes off the footy. You pay the price.
That's not real basic stuff here, isn't it, really?
That's not dog hungry, back with the flight. That's not playing like your life depends on it. So this is an execution issue, but again, it's an issue that we haven't seen from Port Adelaide throughout the year. Well, not when their heads are in the game. That's not bodylining a footy, Brownie.
No,
that's not the intensity required at preliminary final level.
100% commitment is needed, and I've got no doubts the coaches would have addressed this. You know, 2 weeks ago when they did that big finals win against Geelong, but at the end of the day, the practicalities can be more difficult, and you've got a lot more younger players in this Port Adelaide list, and you just wonder whether they were, listening to the positive words, obviously getting the back slaps in the local cafe, all these sort of things. They're all subconscious things we know, but it can have an effect. And it looked as if this team just wasn't ready for whatever reason. I don't think it would have been through lack of preparation with the coaches, but their basic fundamentals, really.
I mean, look at some of these efforts. Like this is where the game's starting to slip away now for Port Adelaide. Again, Rosie, recidivist on the night. And he's a great young talent and a great young kid, but he'll have nightmares about this. That's twice in a prelim final, taking your eyes off the footy. And this is the sealer. This is when you knew, OK, the moment's gone for Port Adelaide. Missed tackle, you could have stopped the play at the source. Have a look at Bailey Smith here. He's run past 3 Port Adelaide players to Leia Shepherd, and this was the moment, Jared, where you just put down your glasses before half-time because
it was gone.
The game was over here for Port Adelaide. And in the blink of an eye, all the hard work that you'd done throughout a season and the course of years to get there, it was done.
I've heard people discuss a lot how they've lost back-to-back home prelim finals, but you have to distinguish and put it into context as you've done. Last year, it was a kick either way. The siren went at the wrong time for Port Adelaide. They did themselves proud. This is something they need to dig deeper on and find out, because it was season's worst performance.
It was the manner with which they lost, Brownie. So you can lose and it can still haunt you. Like personally, I'm not a player that's won one. And for this group, if they don't now go on to win one, this night will haunt them. Yeah. So I'm talking about especially the senior players where their careers are closer to the end than the beginning. But for the group that I was a part of, we lost 09 and 10, you could put your head in the pillow because you knew from an effort point of view, you gave everything you possibly could. Didn't execute as well as you would have liked, but from an effort point of view, there was nothing else that could have been done. That's not the case with this game from Port Adelaide. So you have to ask the question, how does that happen? How does that happen coming into a preliminary final? And there can only be really one of two things. Either they had a foot already in Perth, Gaz, or they didn't embrace the pressure and embrace the hype, because you have to sit on that as a player, and it's uncomfortable. But when that washes over you and you think, gee, we're under a bit of pressure because of all the things we've spoken about, that's the moment when you say, OK, that's all right, the pressure's fine, but I know that when the moment arrives, I'm going to commit my body. And they just didn't do it, Gaz.
They failed, Rui. There was a failure on the biggest stage, and everything you said is 100% on the money. And you have to think about preparation, you have to think about messaging, you have to go to the coaching group, you have to go to Ken. They have to look back on how they prepared for those 2 weeks, because to all intents and purposes, it looked like a side who thought and believed much of the discussion and narrative around this Western Bulldogs team that had been travelling and had injuries, and Keith comes out, so therefore Dixon became... All of that looks to me like they believed every bit of it and played like it. And then we're going to get onto the Bulldogs, don't worry about that, because they were... I mean, if you reckon Friday night was great and it was almost as good as I've seen for a long time, that was every bit as good from the Dogs.
Yeah, they were terrific. Hard to really spot on effort. So it's hard to diagnose the season and the loss, because there's been a lot of good the last 6 weeks. effort wasn't there. But then you've got to be questions on the strategy as well. So Port Adelaide, around the stoppages, what do we know about the Western Bulldogs? They like to chain out by hands from stoppage. Round 22, Alistair Clarkson did a masterclass in the Western Bulldogs. Didn't allow any extra Bulldogs midfielders. They weren't able to chain out by hands. Consistently throughout the night, Bulldogs had extra players at the stoppages. This is their MO. They were allowed to do it, and they just waltzed out of there, and they were able to create. Have a look at this one. There was a halting play. The umpire stopped the game to allow Treloar to put his jumper back on. Any danger, you're going to man him up. And Bailey Smith, who's arguably the player of the finals at the moment. Look what happens. So you just gave the Bulldogs what you want. So, yes, poor effort multiplied by poor strategy. In this case, Rui ends up with a bad result. You have 7 goals to 1 at quarter time.
You get what you deserve in that situation when you're Port Adelaide. These are the senior players that will be probably carrying a lot of the responsibility, I think, within the group. But we just saw then, no one was immune from the lack of effort that we saw.
Jonas was ordinary too, the captain.
Mate, they all were. Yeah. It was a horrible performance. I was a bit surprised Ken didn't go harder in the post-game press conference. But I suppose you're trying to protect your players. But
shell shock.
He probably was, Gaz, because you just do not see that coming as a coach. But at the end of the day, effort's not a given. You've got to get your group to a point where they're going to commit 100%, and they just, for whatever reason, they just weren't there, the power. It was embarrassing.
So Ken Hinkley will be digging deep and I guess looking at his own performance before he starts looking at anybody else's, Gary. Tell me the responsibility for getting your head right before a grand final, before a preliminary final. Is it coach? Is it player? Where does the ultimate responsibility lie?
The best teams have got the players who don't need any prodding and poking. They're just self-motivated. They know, they understand the stakes, they understand what's at stake. But there are elements of your team that do need it and do need motivating, Jared. So it does come back to the coach as well. And I've heard different narratives around it. And Ken will turn around and say, hey, I did it. Ken may very well turn around and say, I did everything I possibly could, as I've done in previous games where and that's the frustration of coaching human beings with human frailties. I think it'll be a really good conversation to have with Kenny when he does come up for air, because right now, as I said, I reckon he's just shell-shocked.
Really, I spoke to a grand final coach who had a really poor performance, not himself personally, but his team after a grand final loss, and he was reflecting and he was saying he didn't think it was his responsibility to get guys at the mental readiness required for a grand final.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it is the coach's responsibility, but you can only do so much. It's a time when the players are away by themselves. That's when you invest in your own game. And it can be as simple as, OK, the pressure enters your mind and you can either push it away and not embrace it, or you can let it wash over you and you can think about my first contest in the game. What am I going to do? What's my first contest going to look like? So then when the moment arrives, you've already answered it. By looking at the Port Adelaide players that we just saw vision of, they hadn't answered that question in the build-up. Gaz?
So the question would be, because they were so bad, like this is mystifying, unbelievable head shaking, then the question would be, as the coach, did you identify anything that was off in the pre-game? Because to see what unfolded and to see all those things, structurally that Brownie's talking about, and then emotionally and intent, that is so bad. Then the question, I think, is legitimately asked, did you see anything in the 2 weeks in the build-up that might have indicated, or did you just go into that game and sit yourself down in the coach's box and with your coaching group around you and go, they are where we need them to be? That would be the question I'd ask. And he may very well say yes, and we know that. Coaches will say, there are times where I've thought we were off and they go out and kick 8 goals. Other times I thought they were absolutely on and nothing happens. But, gee, it was that bad. I think you'd wonder whether there were signs on the way through.
Brownie, do you think there was anything strategic in Luke Beveridge highlighting some of the problems they were going through, just to let the Port Adelaide players know they're doing it tough? We can't win. We're going to sleep here and we're going to go there.
It's us against the world, wasn't it? No doubt about it. That's our work. He's played that card beautifully, Bevo, all the way through the final series. So I spoke to Chris Fagan a couple of weeks ago. He thought his players, he'd never seen his players so focused before that game against Melbourne. Yet they played horribly. They played too tight, and that can happen. So look at the report card, Jared, for Port Adelaide this year. I think it's been a pretty good year, but you have to mark them down. Yeah, let's have a look at the positives. My boy Willem Drew, he's been outstanding. Aliir, one of the great pickups, and Fantasia joining now. I think Amon's taking himself to the next level. They've made the top 4 again. You look at the minuses, if we just flick over here, the injuries, that's some key injuries, the shock prelim loss. And they weren't able to beat the top teams this year consistently. So that was an area, so you have to mark them down into the B. So we'll give them a B+.